Good morning. Today I'm going to go ahead and share my final project of The Voice. It is a cultural immersion to the Mexican heritage, and Rui Diaz was the individual whom I had my interviews with. The introduction will start sharing a little bit about what I learned from the cultural experience and exchange, and how my immersion experience influenced my core beliefs about Mexico. And I will start narrating Finding My Place, a personal journey through identity, borders, and belonging. For my cultural experience, I chose a website related to tourism and traveling. In the website, I was able to find a lot of very interesting information on the Mexican culture and especially Mexico City. I learned that Mexico City is the fifth largest city in the world, and it is home to three Nobel Prize winners in peace, literature, and chemistry. One particularly interesting fact that caught my attention is that the first color television transmission occurred in Mexico City back in 1946. Previously, I held the belief that Mexicans possess a superiority complex and that they were the only Spanish speaking country that mattered. I realized through this project that the immersion I experienced through my conversation influenced my core belief about Mexico. I remember having friends asking me, "Where do you come from?" And when I inquired about their interest in my country of origin, the typical response was, "Well, it looks like you speak Spanish, so you must be Mexican." However, this exercise led me to realize that while Mexicans are indeed proud of their heritage, what really bothered me was the assumption from my friends, and not necessarily the Mexicans. There is more than Mexico in Hispanic culture, I would think. Now I've become a little more familiar with the people in Mexico, and there's truly no valid basis for my discrimination or resentment. This dynamic was definitely interesting to explore. I recognized that my attitude toward Mexicans was significantly influenced not by actual Mexicans, but largely shaped by my experiences with American culture instead. Upon further reflection, my American friends created some sort of a bias because they would often refer to what they're familiar to, a Spanish speaking territory close to them, Mexico. That doesn't mean that the Americans see as Mexico the only Spanish speaking country, but rather they're more familiar with them, so they reference it. I realize that it is possible to educate and explain to my fellow Americans through positive conversations the broader reality of the Americas and Latin culture in general. Without further ado, I will go ahead and start my voice project by Rui Diaz, titled Finding My Place, a personal journey through identity, borders, and belonging. I am an engineer. I am from Juarez, Mexico. For most of my life, those two facts have coexisted without contradiction, though not always without friction. My story is one of movement across borders, across cities, and across the invisible lines that separate who people assume you are from who you actually are. It is also a story about how I've learned to carry myself through all of it, and what it has cost me and what it has not. I will guide you through how I found my place, where I come from, moving north, the border, privilege, and the places I've lived. But most importantly, I will share today the framework I carry and what I would hope for in the future. I was born on 1995 in Juarez, Mexico. I attended high school 2010 in El Paso. Later moved to New York City for Columbia University in 2014, and I completed my graduate school in NYU. I currently live in Massachusetts with my beautiful wife and my baby girl, Rosie. I grew up in Juarez, a city that carries more weight in the American imagination than most places its size. People hear the name and think of violence, poverty, and danger. I think of my family. I think of long car trips across Mexico, watching the landscape change through the windows for hours of a stretch. Those road trips were my first real education. With nothing to do but sit, look, and think, I learned to be alone with my own mind. I found myself asking questions about the worlds, about meaning, and about what kind of life I wanted. Those hours of unscheduled, unhurried thought shaped the way I approach everything. I arrived at Columbia not with the anxiety of someone hoping to fit in, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew they belong. As I moved north for high school, I crossed a border, not just geographically, but culturally. El Paso is a city that lives in two worlds simultaneously. Its culture, food, and rhythms are deeply Mexican, yet sits on the Americas side of the Rio Grande. For me, that transition never felt like rupture. It was a natural, almost seamless transition. I was surrounded by people who looked like me, spoke like me, and understood where I came from without requiring an explanation. There is one experience, however, that no amount of education or professional achievement has ever fully insulated me from crossing the border. Every time I traveled from Juarez into El Paso, and I have done so more times than I can count, a baseline stress sets in before I even reach the checkpoint. It is not dramatic or sudden, it is quiet, steady, attention, a heightened awareness that I'm entering a space where my legitimacy can be questioned, where the rules are asymmetrical, and where I have very little power. I do not believe this experience is unique to me. I believe it is something almost every Mexican crossing that border carries, whether they speak about it or not. I remember being pulled aside and questioned extensively about my education, who paid for it, why I was in New York, and what engineers do, despite having all the correct documents. I would say that that is the only context in my life where I felt genuinely diminished, not because of anything said explicitly, but because of what the situation itself communicates, that I must prove once again that I belong. The helplessness of that dynamic, the inability to push back, the requirement to navigate it with perfect composure is what stays with me long after the crossing is over. The fear of being judged incorrectly and a wrong response carrying a serious consequence. It's a burden that no credential or achievement has fully removed. I would like to say that I am self aware about my own privilege. I acknowledge that I have never truly lived as a minority. El Paso is majority Latino, and New York is one of the most diverse cities in the world. My welcoming workplace experience is fortunate environment I've inhabited. It is easy for me to have this trickle down to my own attitude, which leads me to my personal framework. When faced with dismissiveness or prejudice, I either reframe the situation internally or simply let it pass, not out of denial, but as deliberate refusal to let others' biases define my own experience. This works for me because my circumstances have supported it, and I would have never suggest that attitude alone is enough to overcome systemic discrimination, but I'm fortunate for this to have been my reality. What I hope for is ultimately no exceptional treatment. I want the ordinary dignity that should be available to everyone, to cross a border without fear, to enter a room without having to prove I belong, and to be seen a full person before being seen as a category. Juarez is not a city that most Americans imagine. It is a city of engineers, artists, and family, of people working hard and building something meaningful. The more that story is told humanly, the better it is because it becomes more real to others and it starts conversations. I wish for my people genuine understanding. A conversation like the interview we've conducted together is one of the most powerful tools for changing how the Mexican people are perceived. Storytelling is very powerful. I am an engineer from Juarez. I have traveled far, and I carry all of it with me. The road trips, the border crossings, the classrooms at Columbia, and the quiet confidence I've learned to wear as a matter of necessity. I would not trade any of it.